Hello and welcome to the WPAOG Broadcast Network. In this episode of the WPAOG Podcast, Bridget Altenburg, President and CEO of the National Able Network, is joined by Kimberly Jung, CEO of Blanchard, and Emily Miller, Senior Impact Fund Manager at Twilio.org. In 2004, they founded Rumi Spice, an award-winning social enterprise that provides high-quality, sustainably farmed saffron to world-class chefs and Michelin-rated restaurants by sourcing directly from Afghan farmers in an economic partnership in the supply chain. Kimberly and Emily are 2008 graduates of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, former U.S. Army engineer officers, and Harvard Business School graduates. As social entrepreneurs and co-founders, Kimberly led Rumi Spice as CEO and Emily as COO. They have employed over 4,000 Afghan women and partnered with over 300 Afghan farmers. Their work has been featured on Shark Tank, selected for Y Combinator's Social Fellowship Program, and featured in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Foreign Policy, NPR, Forbes, the Chicago Tribune, Nightline with Diane Sawyer, Voice of America, Food and Wine, and many more. In this episode, Kimberly and Emily talk about how their time at West Point and in the military prepared them for becoming entrepreneurs, the tremendous impact Rumi has had on spice trade in Afghanistan, and how their startup has helped create jobs for women in the country. They also recount stories of their experiences serving abroad in the Middle East. Now, please enjoy this interview between Kimberly Jung, Emily Miller, and your host, Bridget Altenburg.
Hi, Emily and Kim. It's great to see you. So glad you could join me today. How are you both doing?
Doing well.
Hi, Bridget.
Excited.
I think the last time we were together was in Chicago, and I believe we were eating saffron ice cream, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yes. Potentially, we also had saffron
Yeah, there
gummies
were saffron
at the
gummies.
same-
I think there were probably other saffron products, but yeah, I still got my... So this is a new bottle because I used the other bottle that we used years ago. So this is a new saffron bottle. So good to see you both and so excited for everything that's happened with Rumi. I'm really excited to talk to y'all about your journey and how all this came about. I think it'll be an exciting story for a lot of people. So let's get things going. So first off, walk us back. Tell us a little bit about what you were like in high school.
Well, this is Kim. I grew up in Chinatown, Los Angeles. My parents are from Hong Kong and they're immigrants. And so I grew up with a stereotypical tiger mom. And so like A minuses were not acceptable. And I had to get a 1600 on the SAT. That was the goal. And I did all the extracurricular activities and whatnot. And so for me, it was all about getting, to the best college and becoming a doctor in life. And so I very much drank that Kool-Aid until I left home. But I'm really glad I did because then I ended up going to West Point and my whole life changed.
Wow. Emily?
Yeah.
Just the same, I think, right? Just
The
the
exact
same.
same. Yeah, no. Very different. I grew up in Evansville, Indiana, so in the Midwest. And I don't know, had a really fun, chill childhood, I think, compared to Kim. I was kind of a tomboy, just running around in the cornfields, playing with the boys, doing everything they were doing as much as I could. Love sports. Obviously, I'm a Hoosier, so basketball, running track and cross country, and very competitive when it came to sports. But like him, very driven, valedictorian, cared a lot about school and grades and participating in kind of activities in high school. And actually remember the exact day that I found out about West Point. I was a sophomore and a friend of mine had gone to the Naval Academy summer program. And that was it. I knew that's what I wanted to do from that moment on.
Yeah, I am curious because I came from a military family. So like West Point was always a thing you looked forward to, you tried for. But for both of you from non-military families, I'm just curious, like, how did you even know West Point was a thing? What made you aspire to go to West Point?
I know for me, at least, I didn't have any family that were really affiliated with the military at all. And I'm not even sure I would have found out about West Point had my really close friend who I ran track and cross country with not told me about the Naval Academy. And after I looked at the Naval Academy, I was like, that place doesn't seem very cool. But West Point seems really cool. And, I think the moment, it sounds really cheesy, but it was just one of those like life-changing moments where you're like, your pulse quickens and you just like feel it. You're like, that is what I want to do. That place is like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I had kind of been waffling between various colleges, Purdue or Indiana University. And then I found West Point, and I knew that's where I wanted to be.
And Kim, I can't imagine an immigrant family in LA that West Point is like on the radar, even all the way across the country.
Definitely not, Bridget. I think my parents only had heard about Harvard, and that's the only place they wanted me to go. When in fact, there's a ton of awesome places to go, and they had never heard of West Point. And I heard about this guy who had gone to West Point, and it's a place where you learn to become a leader, and you lead soldiers into battle, and you get to travel the world and defend your country. And it spoke to me. Like Emily said, it just went into my bones. And I was like, this is where I want to go. And I was really excited. And I was always, like Emily, I was always a really physical person, and I played a lot of sports, and I wasn't outside as much because I lived in a concrete jungle in Los Angeles, but I felt like I had the same sort of warrior mentality that you, Bridget, probably have also, and Emily and all these other West Pointers. That's what we come to West Point for. And so I just had to go.
So talk to me about our day, having not, been there before and not having a military family or background. How did that go down?
Our day for me was, I also decided to cut my hair.
So
me too.
One less thing.
Decided,
Yeah.
I'm going to do
Me
it.
too.
Yeah.
Me too.
I didn't know how to do
all
a bun, so cutting it was.
Oh
we
my
were
gosh.
allowed to do buns. We had to have it off the collar. And I think they had to touch your hair just for the emotional trauma. So they'd still
Got
butchered it. But I had it off. I had it regs before our day because, yeah, I mean, people said don't just take care of it. You don't want it to be that day. So that's good. At least you didn't have that. But I'm sure you did everything else perfectly because you knew everything to expect and you knew how to do facing movements and right.
Right. You just know that because you're born with that knowledge. Not, and like anybody who goes to West Point for the first time, it's always really nerve-wracking. It's your first experience outside of being in the home that you grew up in, and you are on your own. But the truth is, you're not actually on your own. You're with a bunch of other people who are going through the same thing as you. So it's not that scary. And, you have these cadre members who are yelling at you and screaming at you and basically teaching you in a very short amount of time all these, the lessons of the military, the things you're supposed to do, the behaviors, the rules. And it's just coming at you really fast. But you know what? Some of the coolest stuff has even come from our day. There's the cadet in the red sash at the very end where you're walking up to the line and you have to repeat. I actually at this point forgot what you had to say, but you see what stuff you're made of, can you withstand this? Are you able to execute and speak and do what you need to do even under stress? And that's some of the most valuable skills that I think that really shapes character for anyone coming into West Point and when you come out of it.
Not to be a big nerd, but I believe it was new Cadet Altenburg reporting to the cadet in the red sash for the first, second, or third time as ordered, sir or ma'am.
That's amazing.
Still got it.
I passed you first thing.
Still got it.
I may have been a cadet in the red sash as a firstie, so I heard it a lot. So I cheated. Emily, your R day went like smooth sailing, I'm sure, right?
I was so dorky that summer leading up to it. I read every book I could get my hands on about West Point. I have actually on my bookshelf one of those old books. So, it's funny. I memorized what I could, but this is like Kim was saying, you can't prepare for what's coming. There's just nothing, and I remember I was running into my room and my roommate and future roommate and best friend, Whitney Winchester, was there, and she'd done ROTC for all JROTC in high school. And so she was very squared away. She was dressed, had all of her stuff laid out, perfectly ready to go. I didn't even know how to put my belt buckle together. I mean, I think I spent 15 minutes trying to get that brass buckle, so I couldn't even get dressed. And I was like, okay, so I remembered all the lines, but I can't even get dressed. And I remember thinking, and this is just day one. Such funny memories looking back.
So you got through our day. Any fond beast or plebeier stories you want to share?
So for me, I grew up in Los Angeles, so I had never really been out in the woods and played around in the Hoosier State like Emily did. And so I was really bad at land navigation, which is one of the basic skills that you need as a cadet and later on as an officer. So I failed my first two land navs. There's the night land nav and the day land nav, and I managed to fail both. And, I was crying at the end, and I was, I just felt like the absolute worst. They paired me up with another cadet who was supposedly much more squared away. And he actually had to, very embarrassingly, hold my hand in the dark because I had bad night vision. I didn't know how to maneuver around. And I'm sure that they made fun of me so badly behind my back, as I'm fine with that because I got much better at it and we're all friends now. But that's the level of not good that I came into the academy. But the academy trains you, you get better.
Any other remember when stories that you all want to share about your experience at West Point? Good or bad?
I will say plebe year for me was dark times. I always caveat, I'm like, I loved my West Point experience, but not that first year. I really struggled. I'm trying to think, one of the funny memories from Beast was I'm traumatized by the food. I was always hungry and having to put your utensils down and take your, how many bites you got, 3 bites, 4 bites. And actually all of my squad mates were also very hungry. And one of the guys actually started choking because we were so hungry and our squad leader was so intense about not taking it, the certain number of chews. He starts choking and my other squad mate had to do the Heimlich and he got like a medal for it.
Oh my God.
I just remember being really hungry, that first summer.
What activities did y'all participate in at West Point?
I spent the first year, I walked onto the cross country and track team, and I had a blast.
That's hard.
It was hard, and I didn't do well. I did not perform well as a runner under the plebe year circumstances. And then I switched actually to team handball, yuck year on, and just fell in love with that sport. My teammates, it was just a blast learning a new sport like that.
I was on the volleyball team my first year. I had a really rough time as well as a plebe, and I think I had gained 15 pounds and didn't know how to use my body as well either, like, jumping for volleyball. And I was constantly late to the tables. I actually got floated from my own volleyball tables one time because I kept coming late. And so, there were some members of the volleyball team who were really just understood what it was like to be a plebe. And you're really awkward. You just, you say the wrong thing and you don't take social cues very well. But there was other people who were not so nice on the volleyball team.
Bad.
And, I just learned that's okay. It's just a part of growing up, and you are on either side sometimes, right? Like sometimes you're the one who gets the short end of the stick, and the other time you're dealing the sticks in a way that you shouldn't be, and you learn from it later. Yeah, and then I joined Sandhurst after that, and that was fantastic because I was very militarily somewhat incompetent. And since joining Sandhurst, I learned all these basic skills of land navigation, of tying ropes, of working in a team to go over a wall, all the shooting skills. My shooting got much better after that. And I was part of a team. We'd wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, in the blue, black cold, and we would be working out. And I just felt this sense of being part of the small elite group in our company, like doing something great, competing for something.
Did you join Sandhurst because you wanted to improve your military skills?
Actually, yes, I did. And I had talked to my TAC officer about it. And I was like, I know that my military grades are low and, I don't know how to do these military things. And she was like, you should join Sandhurst. And I was like, okay, I joined Sandhurst. And I'm really glad
that I did. That's really cool. So when it got to senior year, now, what are you starting to think about? Like you're in your majors. What are you starting to think about in terms of, being a platoon leader, picking a branch, picking a post? What was that process like for you?
I was a philosophy major and I loved it. And I chose that for very specific reasons. But when it came time for a branch, I remember thinking, this was the combat exclusion policy was still in place. So women were still barred from, the combat arms branches. And I remember, feeling like you kind of had a few options in front of you. And I knew I didn't really want to be a pilot. It just didn't quite call to me. I couldn't even drive stick shift. So the idea of flying a big helicopter sounded like a little out of my league. Didn't really want to be a police officer either. So it kind of ruled out military police, which I think for a lot of women was a close corollary to maybe infantry. So I was really drawn to engineers because to me, it seemed like I was always impressed by all the engineer officers I met. They seemed like genuine problem solvers, really thoughtful people. And I think the mission of the engineers was really fascinating to me that, you could do everything from building to blowing up. You got your demolitions, the fun stuff, but then you're also building roads and airways and bridges. So that, just the versatility of the branch is why I ended up initially going with engineers.
Yeah, like Emily, I also was attracted to the engineers for the same reasons. And it was as close to infantry that I thought I could be at. And also I studied mechanical engineering when I was an undergrad at West Point. And I felt like there was some overlap and I could use those skills that I learned to build bridges and construction, build airfields and roads. And I did end up doing some of that in a limited fashion, but we ended up becoming a route clearance platoon later on when I was an officer and blowing up stuff. So as Emily said, we love engineers, essayions. Bridget, were you an engineer?
I was an engineer too. I took Emily's route. I studied Russian and French, so my degree didn't help at all as an engineer. But I sort of felt like engineering, like Army engineering, is sort of like Lincoln Logs and Legos. Like it's not that complicated. Maybe like later on, if you go Corps of Engineers, I'm sure it gets more complicated. But ours was like, it doesn't fit. Get a bigger sledgehammer. I wasn't calculating a whole lot. Do you feel like your major helped you as an engineer, Kim? Or Emily? Maybe philosophy helps more than engineering. I don't know. Either one of you, did your major help you as an engineer?
No, I mean, I think really what West Point teaches you is about leadership and management, which I think has been the most helpful in my career and also in my time as an officer in the Army. That leadership part, you really just can't get anywhere else in the same way that West Point gives it to you. And you learn it by doing. You learn it through practice. You learn it by following. You learn it by leading in small teams over and over again and getting feedback for how to do it better. And that's what I think is the most important thing that comes out of, West Point into the Army.
Yeah, well, I can't say philosophy naturally kind of segued into the engineer branch necessarily, but I am a staunch defender of the philosophy and literature major. I remember taking my first philosophy class, and that was the first time I'd ever really been exposed to philosophy and being asked questions like, what is the meaning of life? Like, what is a just war? What is excellence, right? Those types of questions. I was about to be an environmental science major. When I heard those questions, I remember thinking, I want to spend my time thinking about those types of questions. I think of it as, it laid a great foundation for those kind of critical thinking skills. And especially when you think about like moral leadership, that's how it prepared me, I think, more for life and definitely to be an Army officer. But no, it didn't help me build a bridge, that's for sure. But they kind of just like fold out.
I also sort of feel like 4 years of being told, you're responsible for this group of people, you're responsible for these people, you're responsible for this mission. When you're a platoon leader, you hear that for 4 years, and it's sort of drilled into you that you're responsible for getting the mission done and taking care of your troops. I don't know how many times we heard, take care of your troops, take care of your troops. And so there's more to it than your major. So those of you that are out there that are considering engineers but scared about the engineering part, like, don't worry about it. You can handle it. There's no calculators in the engineer corps until later on. Now, did both of you go to the same EOBC?
So for our year group, we had both BOLC 2 and eBOLC. So we spent our BOLC time actually together also in Fort Benning, Georgia. I think it was in August.
So at Benning, not at Leonard Wood?
At Benning. That's when I first met Kim. So we actually didn't know each other at school. So BOLC was when we were in the same company, right?
Yeah, we were. And you were like a couple doors down from me.
So did you went to Sapper school right after?
I actually went later on. And Emily, we had another time where Emily and I saw each other. We were like passing ships. Like I had just left Sapper school and she was just coming in. And you know what? And going back to the EOBC days, Emily and I would train up because we really wanted to go to Sapper school and get a tab. And I remember like right before BOLC, we were like in the park in Indiana at her parents' house doing pull-ups.
Yeah, that was an unfortunate day. We did like 100 pull-ups and my
God,
tendons got swollen and I had like Popeye arms showing up to my first day of EOBC. And, it was just a whole thing. I had to wear a long sleeve PT shirt to take the PT test to hide how swollen my arms are. It was ridiculous. So Kim and Emily have many antics.
Had they already allowed women to Sapper school? Because we weren't allowed to go to Sapper school when I graduated. So was that was already a thing, or were you guys going to be some of the first?
No, that was a thing.
It was a thing. Okay. Well, that's cool.
But there weren't that many women at that point. When I was at CTLT, there was a West Point woman, Juliana Bodenhammer, and she had a Sapper tab, and I was like, I want to be like her. She actually was an Army cheerleader before that. And at West Point, I just watch her do pull-ups, in the gym, and she would give me advice about how to get to that point.
That's awesome. And so did you go to the same Sapper school, or you were just different times?
Same location, but different times.
Got it. So talk a little bit about Sapper schools.
I think Sapper school is where you push your limits really far. I think as women, there's not very many of you. And so if you've ever heard some of the Ranger women talk about their experiences, they feel like they're representing all women when they go to Ranger school. And I think for myself, I felt that way. And I wanted to make sure that I was representing the right way and in tip-top shape. And I was a lieutenant at that time as well. And so there were other soldiers who were there, and I wanted to make sure that I was representing female lieutenants in the right way. And I hope I did. By points, I think I did okay. But for me, I think what got me at the end was patrolling. And at this point, you're really tired because you're not sleeping for several days. And I was like seeing visions. Like I saw these gnomes in the woods, and I was having like a joint vision with other people who were in my squad. They're like, oh yeah, there's these gnomes. Like they're going to pull security for us. Like we can go to sleep.
So bizarre.
But you learn some amazing things at Sapper School. Like you learn how to do some mountaineering, and there's this 8-mile ruck march that is really, really hilly, and your feet get wet the whole time because you're just kind of like wading through rivers. You're learning all the knots. You're learning how to blow stuff up, all sorts of things to blow up. You're doing shape charges, like really deep craters. It was cool. We learned a lot, I think.
And Emily, similar experience, or how was your Sapper experience?
Very different. Sapper came at an interesting time because I had already deployed and been in combat. Basically, I had already been in Iraq, and I'd led a platoon and came back to Fort Lewis, and I'd been an executive officer in the same company. And I was in a combat engineer battalion, and they put together a big training program to attend Sapper school, and was really lucky to be part of that. So I got to train up alongside the soldiers and NCOs and officers in my battalion, and was lucky enough to get one of those coveted slots. It was really hard to get a slot too, so sought after. Sapper school for me was my first taste of failure, really. It was my first big, I had really met my limits, and I trained. And within the first week, I had a really, really serious case of rhabdomyolysis. So basically my kidneys started shutting down, and they were trying to keep track of whether rhabdo had at this point become a pretty big issue. And I kept hiding it. And then it got to a point where, in the middle of one of our really long ruck marches, I lost consciousness on the side of the road, and they found me kind of rolled over on my rucksack. So I actually got hospitalized for quite a long time and didn't get to finish Sapper school. So I think it was a really good experience in the end, just coming face to face with failure and what that feels like and how you bounce back, and also learning to respect your body's limits. I learned a lot about how to take care of myself and how to take care of my body, and to always watch out for those around me, my soldiers included, that don't ever push beyond those limits, because you can get scary close to some dangerous stuff. So very different experience than Kim. I think she made it all the way through, and I didn't, but so grateful for the experience. It was one of those rough patches for sure.
That's one of those West Point women thing where it's like, this terrible thing happened and I almost died, but I really appreciate the experience and I learned a lot from it. It's just like so weird. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, let's shift and talk a little bit about your various deployments, because both of you graduated at a time when, we're in 2 theaters of operation and in a combat arms branch. So, and whoever wants to start, talk about your first time getting deployed and what was that like as a young lieutenant or captain being deployed in a combat theater?
I think Emily was lucky to be deployed pretty soon after she joined her unit after EOBC. But for me, I think I had to wait about 1.5 years or 2 years. I got stationed in Germany to the 54th. Actually, I started off with the 15th Engineer Battalion and then transferring to the 54th Engineer Battalion. And so we had trained up as a horizontal construction unit, like building roads and bridges and that kind of stuff. We ended up deploying as a route clearance platoon. So we were looking for roadside bombs and basically making sure that the routes were clear of any ambushes for any infantry platoons or any other units that were coming behind us. So my platoon deployed to Ghazni, which is a base in the southeast of Afghanistan near the Pakistani border. And to be quite frank, I was really nervous. It was my first time deploying, and most of the other of the platoon also had not deployed before, with the exception of our platoon sergeant and the squad leaders and a couple of other soldiers who had had multiple deployments under their belts from Iraq. But it was everybody's first Afghanistan deployment. And you just don't really know what to expect. But you're here with a mission, with the people. You've been training for years to do this, and you got to trust in the Army's policies and the Army's processes and like all the equipment that they gave you. Like, trust your training. And that's why you try hard during the downtimes when you're not deployed, so that when the real time comes, you're ready. So for deployment, we were a platoon by ourselves. We were not with the other company, not with the rest of the battalion. And we were sort of farmed out to the battle space owner, which was kind of the equivalent to a brigade combat team, but the Polish army. So we were really sort of on our own. And we would do our missions, and it would be different every time. Sometimes we would meet with these people in the village. Sometimes there was children that we would give either candy or school supplies to. We would sometimes do missions with the Afghan National Army, do it together, and they would have some really fun and interesting ways that they would conduct battlefield operations that were surprising to us. And I even had some philosophical discussions. So I sort of wish that I studied philosophy in West Point, but I had some philosophical discussions with folks in Afghanistan. Like this man came up to me and was like, why are you here? You know, and you could just be here. You could marry my brother here. Why are you coming here with all of your armor and all these people? You could be part of my family. And I think he was making a point, right? And that was sort of eventually getting to why Emily, me, and a couple of other of our co-founders felt like potentially we were missing the point as a military presence in Afghanistan. It was much more than that. It had to go beyond that. The service goes beyond the military, and it goes into connecting with the Afghan people, figuring out if there's anything holding them back, what is that? And the root of the problems were actually economic problems, you know? So that was my deployment experience.
Well, Emily, talk a little bit about your deployment to Afghanistan. So you were in Iraq, obviously, as a platoon leader, and then you were in Afghanistan as a CST, or were you in Afghanistan multiple times?
I was in Afghanistan twice as a cultural support team member, so supporting the special ops teams. It was one of those miraculous moments when I found out about the CST program. A little bit of context. We had been fighting these wars for about 10 years, almost a decade, and we still had these all-male special operations teams going out and doing night raids and village stability operations. But culturally, it was inappropriate for men to be able to talk to Afghan women or children. So they started the cultural support team program to train women to essentially join these on a temporary basis, these all-male special operations teams. So I was really lucky to be in the second ever CST team, and I supported the direct action side, so 75th Ranger Regiment and SEALs, and also our Delta counterparts. And so, yeah, it was a very kinetic, intense deployment. It was short for me. It was night raids and going out night after night. And like Kim mentioned, seeing the same kind of cycle of violence and not really feel like we were making enough of a difference. And then I got pretty severely injured in a fast roping accident training. So that into that first deployment, I was lucky enough to multiple surgeries later, lots of physical therapy, got to train the next cohort of CSTs and then go back with them as the officer in charge of that next cohort.
Did not know that. I remember seeing the contraption holding your leg together, but I did not know you went back. That's intense.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was hell-bent on recovering and going back. You know, I felt like we had unfinished business. I felt like we could make the program better, the CST program. So that was also part of it, which was helping revamp the training curriculum as somebody who'd been there, kind of boots on the ground. But then also going back, my teammate, Ashley White, was killed in combat while I was recovering from multiple surgeries. So I just felt like there was a mission there that needed to be continued. And I really felt strongly that I, needed to do my part and get back over there. But Kim and I overlapped on our deployments. So we weren't doing the same mission, but we were in country together at the same time. And we would stay up late at night talking on the Sapper phone when we probably were not supposed to be talking on the Sapper phone. Yeah, just like reminiscing.
But it was free. At that point, I was no longer a platoon leader, but I was doing night battle captaining. And so I was up at night. And Emily was also up at night because, she's with the Rangers and they're doing the night ops. And so, yeah, we would pick up the phone. I don't even know how, I guess we were emailing. We were like, oh my God, are you in country too? And what's your Sapper line? And then we would call each other every night and just reminisce about old times, talk about stuff. And honestly, that connection with Emily kept me sane because I was not in a good place, actually, when I was in Afghanistan at that time. And I don't think that I would have made it through without her friendship, without having someone else understand what it was like to be deployed. For me, I was a bit lonely, too. I mean, it was me and my soldiers in the talk, but, it still wasn't quite the same. And so it was really nice to have, a friend, a former classmate, someone who'd gone to Bolic with me, someone who understood the stuff. And then eventually we would start a business together, So I think those were the times that we started building that foundation.
That's awesome. Did you guys talk about going to Harvard Business School at that time? Like, when did that decision happen?
I didn't even contemplate getting out of the military until I had been injured and then came back from that second Afghanistan deployment. It was in our 5th year of service. And I remember I was like, Kim, I kind of think I'm going to go to grad school, but I don't really know like what I want to do. And you were like, Harvard Business School seems really cool. And they do leadership. They get leadership.
Was it your mom whispering in your ear, Kim?
Yeah, that's why my mom's training, like, go to Harvard. Go to Harvard. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of military officers, when they get out, they consider going to business school because it's like the skill set is very transferable to business. And you're like, well, I don't know what to do. I'll go to business school. You do figure it out. You figure out some part of you. You got to try. You got to make a choice for something, right? And I think when you're in the military, you don't realize how big the world is. And there's like a lot you could do. And business school is not a bad idea because they really emphasize the discipline of leadership, which is something that you've been practicing for the last 5+ years at that point, 9 years, if you include West Point or, ROTC.
So you're at Harvard Business School together. When did the idea for Rumi come up? When did those seeds I know the seeds got planted back in your deployment to Afghanistan, but when did you decide that you could make this a business?
We have a friend named Keith Alaniz, and he at the time was also in the Army. He was deployed in Afghanistan as part of the AFPAC Hands program, where he learned Dari and he really integrated within the population. I think he was helping out with some local governance. And so Emily and I were in Harvard Business School at that time. I think it was at the end of our first year, and we were Skyping with Keith, and he was telling us about this farmer named Haji Yosef who had all the saffron he was trying to sell, and he had a marketing video full of photos and videos, and and he knew what he was doing, like he was selling. He was just really scrappy. And I remember thinking to myself, I wish I had more of that spirit. I wish I had more of an entrepreneurial spirit instead of me. At that time for me, I was trying to go into consulting. There's nothing wrong with consulting, but again, I don't think it was like, I don't know if I was taking a stand towards something that I believed in and wanted to build something. So Keith and me and Emily were like, let's do this. Let's start a business, and bought a ticket to Afghanistan. Emily and I both had the same entrepreneurship professor, Shikhar Ghosh, and he ended up going with me to Afghanistan that first summer. And he was like our photographer, actually. And we met up with Keith, and we met with Haji Yosef, who was that farmer, and bargained with him. He had these super high prices, but he was just doing his thing. And then we met with 11 other farmers in the Gurion district on the other side of Afghanistan in Herat province, which is right next to Iran. So it's on the western side of Afghanistan. And bought the first saffron there. When it came into the room, you could smell just how amazing it was. It was so fresh, so fragrant. Afghanistan has the best saffron in the world. It's been rated #1, for many, many years. And the ISO, the crocine content is extremely high. So the saffron came into the room and it was in a cardboard box wrapped in string. So we realized that the problem was marketing and it wasn't getting to the right channels. And so Emily, Keith, and I decided, hey, let's start a business around this. Let's bring this beautiful Afghan saffron to the international market. And so Emily and I were going to use our Harvard Business School education to figure that out. And we did. We knew everything, I'm just kidding. We had to learn everything the hard way.
Yeah, clearly you do know enough, because I'm not a chef or a cook even, but you can tell the difference, because when you see regular saffron, it looks a little bit like wood chips and it's yellow. This saffron you can see is this brilliant red color. And when you mix it in, it turns this bright yellow, and it's different. I give it to people all the time that actually cook, and they're always like, oh my God, I've never seen saffron like this before. Where'd you get it? And of course, gives them an opportunity to talk about Rumi, but it's amazing how different it is from the saffron that, most people are used to.
We were in this entrepreneurship class, and I remember when Kim came up with the idea, and Kim went headlong into it. She bought the website domain, she set up the company. She's a builder. Kim is quintessentially a builder. And I remember I was like, this is never going to work, Kim. I love you, but this is never going to work. And after that summer, though, we came back to our second year of business school and just went headlong into it, and we had a blast, building it. And we were surrounded by wonderful advisors and mentors in Boston. And Kim is a great salesperson, so was going around to these restaurants and selling it. We just got so much traction early on, and it became clear that, it was a great story, but more than that, it was a great product. And we were so connected to the mission and the people, and, it was just like we found our calling. And from there on, it was a no-brainer.
That's awesome. I remember you telling stories about like having DHL packages sent to your room and like putting stuff in little baggies and then taking them to restaurants. And obviously the story of Rumi is just amazing. Talk to me a little bit about the impact Rumi has had both on you, on Afghanistan, on the people that you've built through this business.
It can't be overstated how much Rumi has impacted a lot of us, Emily and me for sure, the Afghan women, America, and Whole Foods. And just the conversation around Afghanistan and its place in the international market as a valuable producer in a capitalistic society. And we believe in capitalism. We believe in social enterprise that lives in capitalism, where everybody is a key stakeholder and everyone has something to give that's of value. These farmers they're not recipients of charity. They are our partners in the supply chain. And I think our best impact that we've made at Rumi Spice is what we did with the supply chain. So this was actually Emily's main purview when she was the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, is that she headed all the initiatives that we had around food safety. Because in Afghanistan, when we first started out, and you'd mentioned, these little packets that we had in the dorm rooms, we were doing it, but it was barely legal. We actually did get our facility, which was our home. Actually, technically, I think it was actually the Harvard iLab. We got that stamped and certified by the local health officials. But imagine doing that process and scaling it up in Afghanistan, where in the past, Afghan women had been doing it inside their homes, sitting on the floors on carpet, and there's, it's kind of open facility. They're not using gloves, and there's a lot of, contaminants that could come in. And so what we did that I'm most proud of from Rumi Spice is we brought in food safety. We had a whole program. We partnered with Purdue University, and they had 2 professors to help us, and we trained up a whole cadre of quality assurance, quality control people out of the University of Herat. So those were Afghan students who had graduated and who became professionals. And we trained them up in food safety and then got certified in Bangalore. Emily can speak a little bit more to this. And they made up our cadre of food safety in Afghanistan. And because of that, we are able to export that saffron safely. And now it's in Whole Foods nationally. We have 12 SKUs in Whole Foods. So if that can be replicated throughout Afghanistan, and there is more food safety programs for not just saffron, but for everything else, we could be exporting pomegranates, we could be exporting apples. And I sincerely hope that that is the future for Afghanistan.
I think for me, what I took away was that business can be a force for good. And I think that's what we lived every day with Rumi Spice. And I think, like Kim mentioned, the key to our success was that it was an Afghan-led operation on the ground, right? And so we were training and empowering Afghans to lead their operations. And now we have hundreds of farmers, thousands of women who are working in our operations. And with the withdrawal of our forces this past year, Rumi Spice continues on because of that, right? Because we've invested in the people who are on the ground. I think that's the biggest impact we've made.
When you ask any of these Afghan farmers who Rumi Spice is, they're going to say, those are our partners in a business. And they would not say that we're enemies or that we are trying to take things from them or that we're in war. We, as soldiers, former soldiers, want to move the conversation away from war and into economic cooperation.
That's an amazing story. I just can't tell you how proud I am just to have, known you before and after Rumi, and just, continuing to be your friend and a very small part of the success. I wish I cooked more because it's so amazing.
You've been such a great supporter. Thank you so much, Bridget. You've been so great.
We can't thank you enough.
If you're not comfortable cooking with saffron, buy the Rumi saffron, give it to all of your cooking friends, but buy it for yourself and make saffron, cardamom, pistachio ice cream. Google it. It's the best ice cream you'll ever have. And if you're scared of buying saffron, then this is a good way to get you started with ice cream. That's always something we can all agree on. But as we close things up, what are y'all doing now?
So Emily and I are still involved in Rumi Spice, but we're just not involved in the day-to-day. We pass the baton off to some other folks, and we know it's in good hands, and we help out wherever we can. I'm doing another startup. It's called Blanchard House. So we're a group of former BBC and Economist radio producers, and we do narrative-style miniseries. And they're really epic with great sound design and composition. And we're aiming for like TV and film. So hopefully you'll be hearing about one of our stories, and it'll be like a movie starring Angelina Jolie or something. So that's what we do.
Very cool. Emily?
Yeah, I'm currently at Twilio, which is a technology company running their impact fund. So running their grant making and their impact investing. It's an area that has been near and dear to my heart. As an entrepreneur, knowing that, how capital gets deployed is really critical, and making sure that it reaches those underrepresented populations is crucial. That's what I do nowadays, and it's a pretty fun job.
So given that you both have had a chance to, start a business, be successful in business, and kind of looking back, how did the military prepare you for being an entrepreneur?
I think the pace at West Point, where they almost give you too many tasks so that you don't have enough time in the day to do drill, school, all your duties, the laundry duties, sports, FCDT. They give you too much to do, so you have to prioritize. And you just can't get everything done. But you also become really efficient at doing things, and you make decisions quickly. I think all of those skills that I'd mentioned are key to running a business, especially if it's your own startup. So that's one thing. And the second thing I would say is learning how to build trust within your team. And I think oftentimes if you're in the military and you're in a stressful situation, you're deployed, you have no choice but to trust the people to your left and your right, to have trained enough, to have your back, to never leave a fallen comrade, to have the same values that you do, and to have their best judgment, because you need to rely on them as a team. And Emily and I had to do that. And we had been trained to do that before. And those skills were necessary for us to start Rumi Spice and to grow it to the point that we did. And I don't think it would be possible or successful if we hadn't trusted each other, if we hadn't, figured out how to work with each other, to have tough conversations, to figure things out and to problem solve. And those are key skills that I think you get started learning at West Point.
Yeah, I would agree with Kim entirely there. And that I think, entrepreneurship is not for everybody, but it is addicting once you do it, because you realize it has so many similarities to the West Point and Army experience in combat. It's fast paced. It relies on a small, tight team. You have to move fast. You have to ruthlessly prioritize. You have to be incredibly creative about how you problem solve and make things happen. You've got this big commander's intent, and you have to figure out how you operationalize this and work. And then I think the other thing is just being undaunted by failure and by being told no, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable all the time. I think that is what entrepreneurship is. You are in constant discomfort. Will we make the next quarter? Will we be able to pay ourselves? Will we be able to pay our farmers? It's pushing a boulder uphill. And I think for the veterans and service members who do find entrepreneurship and find that it's a fit, the parallels are pretty fascinating.
I never would have guessed that. So it's a fantastic answer. Talk a little bit about how the West Point and the military community have helped you with Rumi.
Our lead investors were actually a bunch of West Point grads, class of 1979, and a couple from other classes. And they believed in us. And they believed in us because they knew that the training that West Point provided and our sense of values and our leadership were exactly the same skill set and what is necessary to be a good entrepreneur. And they had a mock Shark Tank panel for us where they flew to Chicago and they pretended to be the sharks on Shark Tank, and they grilled us in preparation. I can't thank them enough for doing that. It was so great. And they helped us raise money, and they would go, talk to people on our behalf and opened up doors for us. Kate Shattuck, she's one of our beloved West Point women. Her job in real life is to find and resource people. So she has a really great network, and she connected us to so many people. And Bridget, you're also one of those people who have supported us so much throughout the years and been this steadfast, loyal supporter, talking about us to other people, writing reviews on Amazon, allowing us to have speaking opportunities so we can tell the story of Rumi Spice. I cannot thank enough of the West Point community and the larger military community for being so supportive. Bunker Labs has been supportive. Tillman Foundation has also been super supportive.
The list is just so long. And actually, I wanted to double underline the point that Kim made, which is that we pitched our company to so many investors and got told no. But, it was the West Point community that stepped up and they opened their pocketbooks because they believed in our idea against all odds, frankly, growing saffron in Afghanistan at a time when the Taliban was at its peak strength, right? But they invested in us because they believed in us as people. They believed in us as leaders. It was values alignment. And that's the power of the West Point Network, that the people you're working with are rock solid. They're the character, they're everything you want. And I think that is really what enabled us. If we hadn't gotten those initial investments from the hivers and strivers and West Point community, Rumi, I don't think would be around. So I think it really does go all the way back and it was game changing for the company and for us.
That's amazing. It doesn't surprise me at all that the two of you are still finding ways to change the world. And I think it's what brought you to West Point. It's what made you choose engineers. It's what sent you to Afghanistan. And then what got you to start Rumi is the belief that you can make a difference in the world. I'm so proud to know both of you. I'm so proud to have a chance to talk to you. And I hope a lot of people hear this story, make some saffron ice cream, and make a difference in the world. So thanks you all for the time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Bridget.
This has been a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.